Welcome, welcome back. I'm going to continue on examining Greg Ashwell's 1962. Today, we're going to start with where I kind of left off in the last video. I was saying that it's a tragedy. The world that these people inhabit in Cromwell's 1865 is that it's a serious tragedy, and it's a tragedy because in essence nobody can see it, no one can understand it, nobody can understand just how terrible it is, no one can understand just what games are being played, no one can compete, no one stands a chance. And there's this part in the story where Winston Smith is having a dream about his mother, who and his baby sister who disappeared, died. His family was basically destroyed in a war, just like many families are destroyed in a war until basically the whole society is destroyed in a war, in a perpetual war. And humanity is destroyed in a perpetual war. When Orwell says, if you want to imagine the future, imagine a boot stamping on man's face forever. This is what he's talking about. So Winston is having this dream about his mother. Sometime before they disappeared. Um, but they're on this sinking ship, right? They're in a cruise liner or what have you, and it's sinking. And then it says he could remember what had happened, but he knew in his dream that in some way the lives of his mother and his sister had been sacrificed to his own. It was one of those dreams which, while retaining the characteristic dream scenery, are a continuation of one's intellectual life, and in which one becomes aware of facts and ideas which still seem new and valuable after one is awake. The thing that now suddenly struck Winston was that his mother's death, nearly 30 years ago, had been tragic and sorrowful in a way that was no longer possible. Tragedy, he perceived, belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. His mother's memory tore at his heart because she had died loving him when he was too young and selfish to love her in return, and because somehow he did not remember how she had sacrificed herself to a conception of loyalty that was private and unalterable. Such things, he saw, could not happen today. Today there were fear, hatred, and pain, but no dignity of emotion. It's like I said in the previous one, he also says there can be no pure emotion these days, no lust, no pure lust, no pure love, no pure anything, because fear and hatred is tied up with everything. So, could not happen today. There were fear, hatred, and pain, but no dignity of emotion, no deeper complex sorrows. All this he seemed to see in the large eyes of his mother and his sister, looking up at him through the green water, hundreds of fathoms down and still sinking, right, forever out of reach, dying to him, disappearing to him, um, and he's left. If you think about it from a more modern perspective, they might analyze it saying, his emotional life was in his intellectual life, and his very development was impacted not just when his dad disappeared, but then when his mother and his sister died and disappeared, and he became a total orphan and ward of the state, as everyone in the world is, right? Um, you know, it just, he's left. What matters here is that with like a lot of people in reality, he's left looking at the most complex situation in the world with the eyes of a child who had no guidance, no parents, nothing outside of institution to guide him, right? And as you can see in this world, it's a horrible institution. Um, so, the question becomes, how did it get to this? How did it become a tragedy that can no longer witness itself? How did humanity become devoid of itself? How did the abyss swallow them up and then they became basically extinct to be able to even see it? They basically went extinct without going extinct. The people in that world exist like the runes in that world exist. People keep putting on a new coat of paint. People keep renaming the same streets that someone else built. They keep rewriting the same books that someone else wrote. They keep making the same movies. There's only 6 scripts, right? There's only 6 plots fundamentally, as Julia says. You can go on down the line of how dystopic it is. But, to first get here, the tragedy of like no one, you can't even pay people to work for you, right? There's no trust or belief or faith. And then it's hard won and hard earned, and that's for good reason. But even to get to that point where Winston says the tragedy of it is that no one, like, people did it just because they didn't need a reason to stand by family. They didn't need an incentive like, hey, if you snitch on them, we'll throw you a few extra bones in the gulag or something, right? But anyway, with 1842 here by Greg Normanfree, we have, this is chapter 3 of part 2 of the book, called War is Peace, right? And if you remember what the 3 main slogans are, because it's brilliant, right? ABC 1, 2, 3. It really shows you how sloganeering works, and the brilliance of 1984 is you can just tell by reading it, if you have any idea of how this stuff kind of works, is that you can almost reverse engineer or think backwards and see how and why George Orwell worked for as psyops during the war, World War II, that is. So chapter 3, War is Peace. The splitting up of the world into 3 great superstates was an event which could be and indeed was foreseen before the middle of the 20th century. With the absorption of Europe by Russia, of the British Empire by the United States, 2 of the 3 existing powers, Eurasia and Oceania, were already effectively in being. The third, East Asia, only emerged as a distinct unit after another decade of confused fighting. The frontiers between the 3 superstates are in some places arbitrary, in others they fluctuate according to the fortunes of war, but in general they follow geographical lines. Eurasia comprises the whole of the northern part of European Asiatic landmass, from Portugal to the Bering Strait. Oceania comprises the Americas, the Atlantic islands including the British Isles, Australia, and the southern portion of Africa. East Asia, smaller than the others and with a less definite western frontier, comprises China and the countries to the south of it, the Japanese islands, and a large but fluctuating portion of Manchuria, Mongolia, and Tibet. In one combination or another, these 3 superstates are permanently at war and have been so for the past 25 years. War, however, is no longer the desperate annihilating struggle that it was in the early decades of the 20th century. It is a warfare of limited aims between combatants who are unable to destroy one another. Soldiers of fortune, have no material cause for fighting, and are not divided by any genuine ideological difference. Right? Basically saying they have no real reason to fight. The people don't. The people, most people in the world, they're self-referential. They're off in their own world. They don't really understand that the world's a wide, big place, and they don't know or care how other cultures vary because they're wrapped up in their own world, in their own life, in their own survival, and their own happiness. Um, so it has become, okay, this is not to say that either the conduct of war or the prevailing attitude towards it has become less bloodthirsty or more chivalrous. On the contrary, war hysteria is a continuous and universal in all countries, and such acts as raping, looting, the slaughter of children, the reduction of whole populations to slavery are looked upon as normal, right? Factory farms, whether it's here or in China, the fighting, when there is any, takes place on the vague frontiers whose whereabouts the average man can only guess at, or around the floating fortress, or it's around the floating fortresses which guard strategic spots on the sea lanes, aka, carriers and the like. In the centers of civilization, war means no more than a continuous shortage of consumption goods and the occasional crash of a rocket bomb which may cause a few scores of deaths. Or sometimes, like right now, there's, it doesn't get more real than what's happening in Israel and Palestine and Ukraine and Russia and everywhere else in the world where wars happening or about to break out or going to break out, because it's going to keep breaking out because that's just where we're at. You know, that's as real as it gets. But, other than that, most everyone, again, they got to go to work, they got to pay the bills, they got to feed the kids. Someone needs to eventually be sent off to war, right? So here we are. And to understand the nature of the present war, here we go. War was in fact changed its character. More exactly, the reasons for which war is waged have changed in their order of importance. Motives which were already present to some small extent in the great wars of the early 20th century have now become dominant and are consciously recognized and acted upon. To understand the nature of the present war, for in spite of the regrouping which occurs every few years, it is always the same war. One must realize in the first place it is impossible for it to be decisive. In a young country like the United States, something like 228 years old, and I think we've had, 27, 28 years of peace. We've had like one Jim Morrison or one Kurt Cobain worth of peace and just 200 years of war, right? And it's always the same war. Um, One must realize in the first place it is impossible for it to be decisive. None of the three superstates could be definitively conquered even by the other two in combination. They are too evenly matched, and their natural defenses are too formidable. Eurasia is protected by its vast land spaces, Oceania by the width of the Atlantic and the Pacific, right? It's an island, right? That's what protects America, for instance. East Asia by the fecundity and the industriousness of its inhabitants. The primary aim of modern warfare is to use up the products of the machine without raising the general standard of living. It's kind of like Brave New World, where Mustafa Mann says the point of it is max production and consumption just short of total economic collapse. The world of today is a bare, hungry, dilapidated place compared with the world that existed before 1914, and still more so if compared with the imaginary future to which people of that period looked forward. Or I like to go back to even those first cave paintings, when you see what they are, and it's like, yeah, look, there's people and there's animals, and they have spears, and it's like, okay, this is who and what they were. They were people, they liked hunting, they wanted more cows, they wanted more bison. Of course they want more. Who doesn't want more? I covered this in the last video, right? What drives the machine? It's desire, it's need. It's a lot of these things. It's very complicated. So the world of today is bare, and people have nothing to look forward to. In the early 20th century, the visions of a future society unbelievably rich, leisured, orderly, and efficient, a glittering antiseptic world of glass and steel and snow-white concrete, was part of the consciousness of nearly every literate person. Science and technology were developing at a prodigious speed, and it seemed natural to assume that they would go on developing. This failed to happen, partly because of the impoverishment caused by a long series of wars and revolutions, partly because scientific and technical progress depended on the empirical habit of thought which could not survive in a strictly regimented society. As a whole, the world is more primitive today than it was 50 years ago. The machine did raise the living standards for the average human being very greatly over a period of about 50 years at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries. But it was also clear that an all-around increase in wealth threatened the destruction, indeed, in some sense, was the destruction of a hierarchical society. In a world in which everyone worked short hours, had enough to eat, lived in a house with a bathroom and a refrigerator, and possessed a motor car or even an aeroplane, the most obvious and perhaps the most important form of inequality would already have disappeared. Oh, and we can't have that. But in practice, such a society could not long remain stable. For, if leisure and security were enjoyed by all alike, the great mass of human beings who are normally stupefied by poverty would become literate and would learn to think for themselves. And when once they had done this, they would sooner or later realize that the privileged minority had no function, and they would sweep it away. In the long run, a hierarchical society was only possible on a basis of poverty and ignorance. And as much as, you can appreciate some of Marx's lines of thought, there was I think it was Eugene Debs, an early American socialist, but he was a realist, right? He said it's all well and good to care about the poor, but know that a lot of them, the poor, the downtrodden, the worker bees, but know that a lot of them are stupid, mean, cruel, vindictive, murderous, the worst human beings in the world, no different than the worst human beings at the top of the pyramid, can easily be reflected at those at the bottom. They're just less educated, less refined, different people, different jobs, different roles, different personalities, right? So everyone has a place, naturally sorted in Big Brother's utopia. Um, and the basis of this was poverty and ignorance, as well as a state of total control and repression, which just a gulf of fear between every individual that is fundamentally unbridgeable because everything leads to death. Everything is threatened by death. Sure, they'll let you get away with some crimes, right? No different than the real life, right? This is the way it's always been. It's a question of what people will or won't forgive, but in a society where the goalposts are ever changing, when everything's being written and rewritten, when the language changes by the day, right? Um, it's just the perfect excuse for anyone's floor or security to be cut out from underneath them, right? And he gets into this, so I'll keep going here. Because I think there's a fabled mythology, and Winston kind of echoes it in saying the hope is in the proles. And, there's also this thread that runs through the book that, like, hey, these are the undignified poor masses of slaves who've existed through all time. And just now you can see them clearly, or Big Brother can see them clearly, and he's not concerned about them. They're beneath, and they say in the book, they're beneath not contempt, but they're beneath consideration, or maybe they are beneath contempt. But that means they're pitiable, right? Like, pity is a form of contempt. So to return to the agricultural past, as some thinkers about the beginning of the 20th century dreamed of doing, was not a practical solution. Man, it's insane. And a lot of, like, you see here, present ideas about the future or going to other planets, equally insane, just not grounded, out of touch, right? Any country which remained industrially backwards was helpless and was bound to be dominated by its more advanced rivals, right? Because that's history, and that's exactly what has happened and continues to happen. Nor was it a satisfactory solution to keep the masses in poverty by restricting the output of goods. This too entailed military weakness. The problem was how to keep the wheels of industry turning without increasing the real wealth of the world. Goods must be produced, but they must not be distributed. And in practice, the only way of achieving this was by continuous warfare. It is deliberate policy to keep even the favored groups somewhere near the brink of hardship, right? Even the inner party is kept guessing, is kept poked at, right? It's a kind, nobody is secure, no one is safe. Fear and hatred is wrapped up in everything, especially the higher that pyramid you climb. Because a general state of scarcity increases the importance of small privileges and thus magnifies the distinction between one group and another. By the standards of the early 20th century, even a member of the inner party lives an austere, laborious kind of life. Nevertheless, the few luxuries that he does enjoy, his large, well-appointed flat, the better texture of his clothes, the better quality of his food and drink and tobacco, his 2 or 3 servants, his private motor car or helicopter, set him in a different world from a member of the outer party, right? This is where Winston lives. This is where a lot of intellectuals live, because, they don't belong at the top because they're too dangerous and not social enough. They won't play the games. And also, they're kind of like that disgruntled middle management. And that's like, in the fabled, kind of socialist revolution. It's like, oh, yes, the masses of poor people who are essentially classified as criminals by society, or in Big Brother society, their criminality is exactly what makes them free, because they're simply not sophisticated enough to play the game of civilization. It's like they can be the people who are hit by the bombs. They're not the people making the bombs. They're not the people, maybe they make a bolt that goes on the bomb, but they're definitely not designing the bombs, right? These are different classes of people. So, or the marketing, the sloganeering. Remember, Winston Smith works in the Ministry of Truth, right? Which means the Ministry of Propaganda, the Ministry of Lies, because war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Isn't that how it goes? The ABC 1, 2, 3. So false scarcity. Even though modern people live austere, workaday, boring, terrible lives, and enjoy a slightly better quality of this and that, and set him in a different world from the outer party, and the members of the outer party have a similar advantage in comparison with the submerged masses, whom we call the proles, or the proletariat. The social atmosphere is that of a besieged city, where the possession of a lump of horseflesh makes the difference between wealth and poverty. I think I said it before, right? The man who has $2 is 100% better and more valuable than the person who has $1. The person with $100, he's, just 99% better, 1,000% better than the person with no money, right? And then the people with no money, they're just subhuman, right? They're inhuman, especially if they can't tend to the machines. If they don't run by the machines, if they aren't run by the machines, if they're not on the machine schedule, they're the subhuman, supposedly, right? So, the social atmosphere is that of a besieged city, where the possession, okay, yeah, the indignity of it, the disgusting nature of it, how gross it is. And at the same time, the consciousness of being at war, and therefore in danger, makes the handing over of all power to a small caste seem the natural, unavoidable condition of survival, right? And I keep saying it over and over again. America itself, Big Brother itself, it's been a system of infinite deferral of selling out, people selling themselves out and each other out until there's nothing left. Who's responsible now? There's someone you can call, right? There's someone you can trust, right? There's someone you can pay even. Oh, it's hard to find someone you can even trust to pay. Okay, war, it will be seen, not only accomplishes the necessary destruction, but accomplishes it in a psychologically acceptable way. What is concerned here is not the morals of the masses, even though that's the excuse, right? You use the many, the hopeless many, to justify the few, as long as they're kept steadily at work, right? What is concerned here is not the morale of the morale of the masses, whose attitude is unimportant so long as they're kept steadily at work, but the morale of the party itself. Even the humblest party member is expected to be competent, industrious, and even intelligent within narrow limits. But it is also necessary that he should be a credulous and ignorant fanatic whose prevailing moods are fear, hatred, adulation, and orgiastic triumph. In other words, a psychopath, or someone who's been whipped and beaten and conditioned to run a marathon for their entire life. In other words, a pointless marathon where it doesn't matter. The horse, if the horse breaks a leg, you just put it down, right? You got to keep running, or they will put you down, right? In other words, it is necessary that he should have the mentality appropriate to a state of war. It does not matter whether the war is actually happening, and since no decisive victory is possible, this is why it's nihilistic, right? Because you can't actually win. The whole thing is a lie, and it's reinforced with nothing but more lies. It does not matter whether the war is going well or badly. All that is needed is that a state of war should exist. And when everyone's an ignorant fanatic, there's no concept of truth. I think truth has probably already been removed from the language because there's newspeak and there's doublespeak and there's all these things. But the point of the story is that you're learning that the language is being destroyed. You're learning that eventually there will be no language upon which to have thought crimes, because the language will be so selected and controlled for that no one will be able to repeat any aberrations, because they will have been surgically removed or sort of lobotomized over a long drawn out, historically unprecedented process of sort of running a head job on, like, basically the biggest psychological experiment in human history, really, is what we're talking about. The biggest Frankenstein job, you know. So all that is needed is that a state of war should exist. The two aims of the party are to conquer the whole surface of the earth and to extinguish once and for all the possibility of independent thought. That's right. World in a straitjacket, right? A boot on your face forever. There are therefore two great problems which the party is concerned to solve. One is how to discover against his will what another human being is thinking, and the other is how to kill several 100 million people in a few seconds without giving warning beforehand. Damn air raid sirens makes it hard for these large weapons to be effective. It's in so far as scientific research still continues, this is its subject matter. The scientist of today is either a mixture of psychologist and inquisitor, studying with extraordinary minuteness the meaning as facial expressions, gestures, and tones of voice, and testing the truth-producing effects of drugs, shock therapy, hypnosis, and physical tortures, prescription speed, Xanax, or he is a chemist, physicist, or biologist concerned only with such branches of his special subject as are relevant to the taking of life. In the vast laboratories, in the Ministry of Peace, in the experimental stations hidden in the Brazilian forest, in the Australian desert, and the lost islands of the Antarctic, the teams of experts are indefatigably at work. Some are concerned simply planning the logistics of future wars. Others devise larger and larger rocket bombs, more and more powerful explosives, and more impenetrable armor plating. Others search for new and deadlier gases, or for soluble poisons capable of being produced in such quantities as to destroy the vegetation of whole continents, or for breeds of diseases of germs immunized against all possible antibodies, right? Keep up the good work. All three powers already possess, right? Because more weapons makes everyone more safe, yes, and the most, right? And again, it's deferred out, so someone else is in charge, right? Someone else is responsible, right? Like if there's a problem, you can call someone, and someone will surely show up, right? Like and there's nothing so big that it can't fail or go wrong or go sideways or be taken over by someone else, or maybe be a lie to begin with, right? So All three superpowers already possess in the atomic bomb a weapon far more powerful than any that their present researchers are likely to discover, but are convinced that a few more atomic bombs would mean the end of organized society and hence their own power. Thereafter, all three superpowers merely continue to produce atomic bombs and store them up against a decisive opportunity, which they all believe will come sooner or later, right? The concept of mutually assured destruction. Who's so sure that these weapons won't be used again? Who's so sure that the next world war isn't around the corner? Who thinks, like, if we know what it's been like and we know what it's like, do the math. 2 plus 2 is 4. That hasn't changed, at least in the meantime. It is absolutely necessary to the structure that there should be no contact with foreigners, except with war prisoners. The average citizen of Oceania never sets eyes on a citizen of either Eurasia or East Asia, and he is forbidden the not. Well, if you think about the lower classes, this is true. Like, the other continents know our moneyed people. They don't know the actual average American. They don't know the C student American. I mean, maybe they do from our media, and I guess some of them have enough monies, or maybe they win game show prizes, and wind up in other parts of the world. But as a rule, like, they're generally not traveling, right? So a lot of people are indeed cut off from foreigners. Think of North Korea, right? Bunch of, poor country run by a dictator state still, right? They're still stuck in the 40s, right? They need to get with the times, right? This is like the story says, those who fail to industrialize, but hey, they're working on their A bombs, and they have their vulgar displays of power as well. So if he were allowed to contact with foreigners, he would discover that they are creatures similar to himself and that most of what he has been told about them is lies. The sealed world in which he lived would be broken, and the fear, hatred, and self-righteousness on which his morale depends might evaporate, right? And he doesn't say, he admits it's his theory, right? He says it might. He doesn't say it will. Under this, or that it would matter in any number, or whatever the case is. Under this lies a fact never mentioned aloud, but tacitly understood and acted upon, namely, that the conditions of life in all three superstates are very much the same. In Oceania, the prevailing philosophy is called Ingsoc. In Eurasia, it is called Neo-Bolshevism. And in East Asia, it is called by a Chinese name usually translated as death worship. But perhaps better rendered as obliteration of the self. The citizen of Oceania is not allowed to know, and they all, if you notice, they all mastered that. They all specialize in worshiping death, in dealing death, right? The civilization itself, that the only difference between those at war and those not at war is that it's a matter of consumer goods shortages and where are the rockets going to land, right? Where are the terrorists going to show up? Where are the revolutionaries going to happen, right? Because we're kind of still at that stage of history. I think they're still trying to figure out how to further clamp down, right? But luckily, AI and algorithms and the fact that they already stole everyone, consent, like no one has consent here. So, they already have all the data and the AI and the biometrics too. So, and the spending habits and the rest of the habits, it's pretty easy to keep people wired into a very tiny world. So, the citizen of Oceania is not allowed to know anything of the tenets of the other two philosophies, but he's taught to execrate them as barbarous outrages upon morality and common sense, right? Our language of good and bad is correct. Your language of good and bad is stupid. Your good and bad is evil. But see, here's the thing. They basically, Big Brother pioneered and engineered how to have the good without the bad. So despite the fact that they live in a dilapidated, horrible, perpetual warfare world, they're conditioned and convinced by statistics and lies that change by the day that, oh, we've progressed more than ever. People are happier than ever. Death is down more than ever. People are less sick than ever. Despite everyone having their eyes to see the world around them, that it doesn't reflect the fact that these lies are told, that these statistics are made up, that people are just making these blind rationalizations anyway, but at the end of the day, it's about languages, good and evil. And so Big Brother says, hey, we're only good. Everything else that we say is evil, but it's not even evil because we've gotten rid of that. Now it's good and good plus good, right? Or check plus good, I think is how it goes, right? They've really made it inane. They've really brought the language down to the dumbest level, the most mind-numbing, to where like the language in which people think to even evoke something like a feeling, right? That it's basically like the language and the thought, like it's creating turning the thinking animal into the naturally sedated animal. Hence I mentioned death worship, or hence he calls it obliteration of the self. Whether that's sought actively or passively, it's still a nihilistic dead-end endeavor that supports a nihilistic regime and philosophy and way of life that does nothing but destroy life. It doesn't create life, it doesn't maintain life, it doesn't create new values. It can only alter and destroy what's there. Just like with the people, Big Brother, right? He doesn't create new classes, he doesn't create new castes, he just tampers with what's there. He just enslaves what's there, and you better believe it, everyone from the top to the bottom is a slave in this pyramid. So, I'm going to read a little bit more and then we'll get going here. It's already longer than I intended. And if it cuts out, I'm just going to let it be and let the chips fall where they may. Uh, so, actually, the three philosophies are barely distinguishable, right? Because the reality is all the same. And the social systems which they support are not distinguishable at all. Everywhere there is the same pyramidal structure, the same worship of a semi-divine leader, the same economy existing by and for continuous warfare. The three superstates are dedicated to world conquest, but they also know that it is necessary that the war should continue everlastingly and without victory, right? Because what would victory entail? What then? History would have to start again. People would have to come alive again. Individuals would have to exist again. New things would have to be developed again outside of the corporation state that deals death. Did I turn this thing off? My apologies, guys. Okay, silent mode on. That's how that thing works, right? The fact that there's no danger of conquest makes possible the denial of reality, which is a special feature of Ingsoc and its rival systems of thought. By becoming continuous war has fundamentally changed its character. Efficiency, even military efficiency, is no longer needed. Nothing is efficient in Oceania except the thought police, right? And they talk about that earlier in the story that, like, unless you can fix something yourself or do it yourself, it's going to be expensive. It's going to be hard to find competent people to do it. And that if you expect the state to do it, it's going to be some committee of a subcommittee of a subcommittee who intentionally takes forever. And Paris, like, we see it every day in our papers, right? People coming out for stealing, millions or thousands from the state. It's just a daily occurrence, right? So you see there's part of why the culture is not just morally, but basically factually bankrupt by its artificial scarcity. Or rather, not artificial scarcity, it's actually a war-induced scarcity. Meanwhile, the fact that there's no danger of conquest makes possible the denial of reality, which is a special feature of Ingsoc. And okay, I said that. By becoming thought police. Since each of the three superstates is unconquerable, each is in effect a separate universe within almost any perversion of thought can be safely practiced. The rulers of such a state are absolute, as the pharaohs or the Caesars could not be. They can twist reality into whatever shape they choose. The war is waged by each ruling group against its own subjects, and the object of the war is not to make or prevent conquest of territory, but to keep structure of society intact. Right? This is why everyone's so concerned with the masses. Won't somebody please think of the children? And yes, I kind of get into this too, but there's a difference between, authentic concern, sincerity, and again, the fact that the children, the masses, the poor, unwashed masses, doesn't someone care? No, because again, the most horrifying thing about this book is when they get you to sell out your most cherished loved ones, your only loved ones in this world, where you can even make those points of contact, when they break your brain in their torture chambers. Basically, what they're getting you to realize is what a piece of shit you are, that there's nothing sacred. And if you can't value or extol or hold up what's sacred, then you are nothing. So they break you down into nothing and that you already wish you were dead. Winston says he understood the how, he didn't understand the why, because they needed individuals to die forever. They needed for them to maintain control of the wider species. They needed the entire human species to go extinct. So The very word war, therefore, right, because war implies victory, has become misleading. It would probably be accurate to say that by becoming continuous war has ceased that by becoming continuous war has ceased to exist. The peculiar pressure that is exerted on human beings has disappeared and been replaced by something quite different. Right? The effect would be much the same if the three superstates, instead of fighting one another, should agree to live in perpetual peace, each inviolate within its own boundaries. For in the case, each would still be a self-contained universe, freed forever from the sobering influence of external danger. A peace that was truly permanent would be the same as permanent war. This, although the vast majority of party members understood it in only the shallower sense, in the inner meaning of the party slogan, war is peace. Right? War is control. I mentioned towing lines. The part of towing lines is that people are being told what to do, people are being ordered, people are being commanded. Whether you're a prisoner of war, whether you're a soldier, whether you're a student, whether you're in the fast food line, you're being designated by some outer or upper authority of what to do. And that was part of the necessity in the world, was efficiency. It's one of the most, to this day, it's like the most valuable thing Americans learn, for instance, is how to stand in line. But you can see circa 2024, we can hardly teach that. People can hardly learn that. Like, it's pretty bad. I don't want anyone to think I'm complaining, but if you do, just remember that war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength, right? Anyway, thanks for tuning in. That was just a quick read through of War is Peace, so you understood how we got here, where our characters are at, the tragedy of the situation, right? In a world of no privacy, in a world of no individuals, there are no emotions. There's no connection. There's no reason to be connected to anyone or anything, especially when it's just the risk of death. Anyway, this is the nihilistic world of Big Brother, and this is what they wrought. So thank you for tuning in. Lots more to come. I'm just probably going to upload this ASAP. I don't even want to think about it or look at it. And then likely next will be on specifically thought, crime, doublespeak, and doublethink, and kind of get into that song and dance and that insanity